Good morning, everybody. We're here today to talk through the Building Energy Performance Standards for Montgomery County and specifically solar and renewable energy credit. Thank you all for taking the time today, and thank you all for those that are joining and watching this after it's been recorded for joining us for this important meeting. We're hoping to give you a lot of background information, and we're going to go through some meeting objectives and kind of overviews as we go through the slides. So first off, just to start, introduce myself and the folks that'll be talking today. My name is Adam Agalico. I'm a director at ICF. We're helping to support Montgomery County as they look to understand and explore the different aspects of this solar and renewable energy credit concept. I'm going to let Emily and Lindsay just briefly say hello, and then we'll go over some of the ground rules.
Yep. Hi, everyone. Emily Curley, Commercial Energy Program Manager with Montgomery County's Department of Environmental Protection. You've probably seen me before, but nice to see everyone, and thanks for joining.
Good morning, everyone. This is Lindsay Shaw. I manage energy and sustainability programs here at the Department of Environmental Protection for Montgomery County. I want to thank everyone for taking the time this morning or watching later for taking the time to participate. So thank you again. Appreciate it.
Great, thanks. So as we go through today, just a couple of ground rules. Wherever possible, please stay on mute. We're going to be unmuting attendees if there's time to speak later on when we open it up for kind of clarifying questions. If, as we're going through these different items, if something isn't clear, please type that into the chat box, ask questions at that point. We've got folks keeping an eye on the chat, and they'll let us know. We can pause and maybe go back and make sure that we're kind of covering something clearly. As I mentioned before, today's session will be recorded, so please note that everything that is said is going to be recorded and ultimately kind of published. And then lastly, we ask for folks as they're just kind of coming into the room to use the chat box to write their name and organization, so we have an understanding as to who's here and who's in attendance. Okay, with that, why are we here today? The meeting objective is really to sort of ensure that everybody has the same basic knowledge to engage in some of the future sessions and the future work we're going to be doing to develop recommendations for a solar and renewable energy credit related to Montgomery County's Building Energy Performance Standard, also known as BEPS. This is really important. There's a lot of options available to the county, and there's really no national template or standard. And so today, ICF as a consultant and MWCOG are here kind of listening and trying to think about how we can get more engagement in this space. So why are building energy performance standards and solar renewable energy important? These are policies that are going to set, BEPS is going to set minimum thresholds for energy performance measured against the demonstrated energy use and energy performance. We really want to understand sort of how to incorporate solar and renewable energy into that program, and it can be complicated, but we're hoping that we can kind of present some of the questions that we've been wrestling with, and then as we get into future sessions, we'll have the opportunity to hear from you and understand kind of where your views are and where your priorities are relative to that work. So we'll be framing that discussion today and working through recommendations throughout the process that we go over in these next couple of meetings. So our overall process, we're going to be doing this in 3 different sessions. The first session is today. It's kind of a refresher on BEPS, review of some of the kind of credit options and some of the trade-offs that we're wrestling with that we want some feedback on. As we get to these second sessions, which are planned for January, we'll have some smaller group discussions where we'll be able to hear directly from folks that are on this call and understand kind of where their preferences are, what their items of interest are. But today we're really just focused on getting everybody familiar with the material. We're not looking to capture feedback or comments. We'll really have a lot of time for that later on. And then lastly, we'll have a third session planned for February where we'll review some of the small discussion feedback and share and discuss kind of initial and draft recommendations. Ultimately, ICF and MWCOG will be providing a stakeholder-informed final recommendation for consideration. That will be done sometime in the spring. And I'm going to turn it over to Emily to talk through a little bit more on BEPS.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, so just by way of background, I think most people are familiar at this point that County Council unanimously declared a climate emergency back in 2017. And that accelerated the county's emissions reduction goals of to be 80% by 2027 and 100% by 2035 relative to a 2005 baseline. As you can see on the chart, we've made some progress, 19% reduction since 2005, but we still have a long way to go. And as of our 2018 emissions inventory that MWCOG helps us to compile every few years, we can see that residential buildings and commercial buildings account for about half of our community-wide greenhouse gas emissions. So how buildings basically create those emissions are using electricity from the grid and then using on-site fossil fuels for combustion to create hot water, to create heat, and also for cooking. Next slide, please, Ed. So when we talk about buildings and climate, I think it's just important framing slide to remember that building emissions can be reduced or offset in several different ways. So on the far left of the slide, we can source renewable energy. So the electric grid can continue to get cleaner, and we have a few strategies for doing that. Those include cleaning the grid through things like state level renewable portfolio standards, looking at supplier choice, like community choice energy that the county's starting to look at, or power purchase agreements to source green energy for the building. Within the building itself, there's a lot of strategies that we have to reduce energy use and thus carbon emissions in buildings. And the main one that BEPS is really focusing on is using less energy via conservation and efficiency. That's, we think one of the cheapest, best ways to start to reduce emissions. But how we've set up BEPS is that the site energy use intensity target that we've selected also encourages electrification of building systems and other end uses. And what we're talking about today is the potential to incentivize renewable energy in one of several ways or many different ways in terms of, on-site renewable energy, direct purchase, renewable energy credits. So, at the building, there are certainly ways to reduce emissions. And then sort of outside of this picture, but still an option, is to offset remaining emissions through RECs and carbon offsets. And especially for carbon offsets, we know that fossil fuel use in buildings will always emit carbon. So that's really the only option remaining for those on-site combustion systems. So anyway, today, just keep in mind that BEPS circle is kind of what we're focusing on and the goal of this policy in particular. Next, please. Okay, so just turning to Bill 1621, otherwise known as the Building Energy Performance Standards legislation. We've amended the benchmarking law to do a few things. The first is to expand the number of buildings covered by the benchmarking law. So we're dropping the building's floor area threshold from 50,000 down to 25,000 square feet and adding multifamily buildings and some other previously exempted buildings into benchmarking. We are adding a performance requirement, that's the biggie. And then we're also establishing an advisory board for BEPS implementation. So all those items are part of the BEPS Bill 1621 framework. There are a number of things that we need to work out via regulation, such as the actual numerical site energy use intensity standards, how we're handling renewable energy credit, and some other adjustments and kind of details around under-resourced sectors. And that's all coming via regulation. I think it's always important to highlight that we have gotten a lot of stakeholder input on the framework itself as far as the policy model, the metric that we're using, and so we think we've got a pretty solid framework to build on. Next, please. So just looking at the policy model itself, again, we're calling this the trajectory model. So really the basis for how BEPS is framed is that each covered building receives a custom baseline based on average historical energy use. We plan to use 2 of the highest years of energy use out of a 3-year baseline. Buildings receive a long-term site energy use intensity target based on their property type. Data is reported annually via Energy Star Portfolio Manager every year, just as is already required by the benchmarking law. But every 4 years, properties are evaluated at these interim target points to ensure that they're on track to meet their final standard. And again, the baseline is from historical benchmarking data, and the final standard will be set via regulation. Now, again, we're exploring renewable energy options as a credit towards meeting BEPS targets. If you've seen our presentation before, we had previously said this was exploring an on-site solar credit. As of our last transportation environment work session, the T&E committee had approved an amendment to kind of broaden our credit research from on-site solar to renewable energy. So that's just a slight change that we're broadening that to look at. Next slide. Okay, and so timing under the proposed legislation, we are still working through the legislative process. So we are anticipating approval of BEPS legislation in 2022, and then regulations, initial baselines, and those details in regulations following passage of Bill 1621. Newly covered buildings that are coming into benchmarking for the first time, so smaller buildings and multifamily buildings would benchmark for 3 years so that they can receive their baselines and then phase into the building energy performance standards portion of the program. And like I mentioned on the last slide, those buildings then benchmark annually and get assessed towards their progress every 4 years. And so for some buildings, they would essentially start in BEPS around 2023 and with their first interim standard 4 years later. And for the first group that would be covered, those buildings that are already benchmarking, their kind of final BEPS standard year is in mid 2030, it's the end of 2034, with other buildings that phase in coming a bit after that. So again, that's a very high level look at BEPS, but again, just to keep this all in context as we start to talk about some of the options for renewable energy credit.
Great, thanks, Emily. And as we kind of think about how a potential solar and renewable energy credit could work, we kind of built out a graphic that hopefully will help kind of illustrate and understand a little bit about what's happening. So looking at that same kind of trajectory model and thinking about kind of where a building might need to sort of meet its kind of final deadline and its interim standard compliance, we can look at kind of a building performance. And so this is building A, and we're saying that it's basically its goal or its target compliance is along this blue line. The orange would be the credit basically with, or the, I'm sorry, the building performance without a credit. We could say, okay, now we're going to kind of assume that there is some type of a credit that is applied, whether that be kind of an on-site solar or some other kind of credit associated with renewable energy that we'll be kind of discussing the options on. And that happens maybe between compliance period 1 and 2. In that instance, as we apply the credit, we could see it basically lowering the actual performance, and then we've got kind of a updated line as to what the actual performance for that building could look like, and demonstrated by kind of a decrease in the net EUI from that credit. So in this case, the building would be meeting its compliance period 2 and the final standard at the compliance deadline. So hopefully this is a useful graphic to sort of see how this could work. This graphic really represents one possibility on how this type of work could be implemented. And as we think about kind of a credit associated with solar and renewable energy, it's important to sort of think about, well, why do we care about this? What is this actually doing for us? And we see that there's a number of different kind of benefits and potential areas that folks might be prioritizing as they think of how this is implemented. So we've tried to kind of articulate a couple of the areas that we think kind of fit some of the priorities from different stakeholders. And kind of we see those as folks that might be more interested in building energy performance, interested in reducing carbon pollution and maximizing that to the fullest extent possible. interested in maybe some of the local benefits associated with solar, whether that be kind of grid benefits or economic activity, job creation, investment. We also see some folks that are maybe interested in aligning this with some of the existing building codes. The key to this is that we really want to understand from you, and this is what the future sessions are going to be about, sort of where your priorities lie and how that might kind of influence how a solar and renewable energy credit could be implemented. Some of the other considerations that we have, we really want to make sure that the level of effort, both from the kind of building owners perspective, as well as the level of effort and the resources required by the county are considered, that we're not creating a process or a credit that is so complicated that it makes it difficult to administer or difficult to kind of apply for or kind of receive that credit. We also have a need to have really accurate information. So all this really depends on how we design the credit, and we can kind of figure out how these benefits are realized. We're going to be talking about some of the kind of issue areas on the next couple slides, we'll sort of have some examples of some of the trade-offs as we discuss this today, and we're really excited again to kind of hear from you in the coming month to sort of understand where your priorities lie. So just kind of a big overview of kind of some of the discussion topics that we see as kind of as necessary to sort of adapt and get to a good policy. First is kind of this definition and this idea of what is a qualified renewable energy source. Second, kind of the treatment of existing solar and renewable energy installations. Third is kind of the treatment and the understanding as to how do renewable energy credits, first, how do they work, but also how do they work from a concept of the credit in terms of how they're used and how they're applied. We've got some questions and some conversation around kind of offsite renewable energy projects. And then lastly, some understanding for, this is really specifically for onsite, but how net metering and exported power might be kind of weighed into to some of these details. So we're going to go through these today and talk through kind of some of the areas of friction and some of the areas where we're trying to understand where priorities might lie. And again, as we get to January, we'll talk through them and get a lot of your opinions and thoughts. So first, starting with qualified renewable energy sources, we really, again, need to sort of understand how to define that. We think that it will likely include or on-site solar, on-site wind. It could also include off-site sources. We don't really see it initially, at least, including battery systems, because that's really an impact on the electricity time of use, not the energy source that's being used. And then also not counting for combined heat and power or cogeneration facilities or facilities within buildings, because that's really already accounted for within the building performance. But you know, this is a kind of the ICF and the ICF and Montgomery County view of this. We really want to get your feedback on this and sort of understand where and what we want to consider as a qualified renewable energy source. Another kind of area is existing renewable energy systems. So we know that there's about 20 existing commercial solar projects in the county on buildings. We know that there's likely some offsite renewable energy contracts through either existing power purchase agreements or unbundled rec purchases. We need to sort of understand how we might apply those type of kind of market activity to this credit and sort of where that might fit in. So we'll be interested to sort of hear how folks feel that that should be treated within the credit. Really briefly, we talked a little bit about renewable energy credits, just to make sure that everybody's got the same baseline of information. Renewable energy credits are certificates that are really corresponding to the environmental attributes of the energy produced from renewable energy sources. So if a solar panel is producing 1 megawatt hour of electricity from renewable energy, it is also producing 1 renewable energy credit. And there's a lot of different ways that RECs can be kind of used, and a lot of different ways that RECs are really helpful for folks. So first, there's a kind of a requirement space under Maryland's Renewable Portfolio Standard. Electricity suppliers are really required to purchase RECs for their customers, and that gives RECs a value. So RECs bought and sold in the marketplace really have a different value depending on where they're from and where they can be applied for and how they fit certain legislative requirements from different states, including Maryland. Within power purchase agreements, third-party project owners may do a lot of different things with RECs. So an organization could sign a power purchase agreement, whether it be on-site or off-site, and they may be retaining that ownership of RECs, or they may be meaning that the third party might be owning those RECs, or they might be providing them to the customer. So, or they might actually just be replacing them and taking ownership of the code of local on-site solar RECs and maybe replacing them with something else. So we need to sort of understand and think about, well, how do we want to value different REC treatments in terms of a credit? And then lastly, there's kind of a umbrella of folks that are just buying RECs because they feel that it's important to sort of get a certificate that corresponds to their footprint. So they're using it to support their environmental goals. And we want to understand sort of how does that fit with the goals and the work that's trying to happen in the solar and renewable energy credit space. So all of these kind of open up different possibilities. We're talking about a lot of different project types, and we want to make sure that we've got a standard that fits. Thinking about offsite renewable energy, this is a small little diagram that shows a little bit on renewable energy power purchase agreements and offsite renewables. I see that there's a question, so I'm going to finish this slide and then maybe bounce back to that. So long-term power purchase agreement is where a buyer will basically procure a portion of output from a renewable energies project. Typically offsite, meaning it could be within state, it could be within the region, it could be really on the other side of the country, depending on how that power purchase agreement is designed. And typically in that type of arrangement, the customer is paying a fixed price for electricity. They're either kind of taking ownership of those RECs, and then they're still paying their utility bill, but they're basically evening out in the wholesale market the cost between their utility bill and the cost for the market. As I said before, there's also this possibility for folks to sort of buy what's called unbundled RECs, which are RECs that are sold really separate from the physical energy. And they can really be bought in a variety of different ways, in a variety of different kind of locations and ages of the renewable energy system. Just wanted to pause for a second. I saw a question from Diane.
I think you can keep going, Adam.
Okay.
I think that it's a question to be fleshed out in the next stakeholder sessions.
Okay, great. Okay, so just to finish up, our last kind of area of interest to sort of talk through is in net metering. And so for on-site renewable energy, we know that not all on-site renewable energy that is generated is often used. So if we look at this graphic, we're saying, in this explanation, we're saying that basically 20 units of energy is produced and generated on-site by the solar panels on this building. 15 of those units are basically applying to the, going directly to the building and being used on-site, and 5 are being exported to the grid. Maryland law allows for basically all 20 units of that electricity that is generated to be applied to a customer's bill. But the question is, when we're considering a solar and renewable energy credit, should this be applied for everything that is just used on site, or should it be applied for everything that is generated on site? So it's really, if we're looking at this example, kind of where would the solar credit fall? Would it fall at 20 units of electricity or 15 units of electricity, given kind of, are we going to apply net metering or are we not when we apply a solar or renewable energy credit? So those are the types of questions that we're, again, trying to wrestle with and looking for feedback on. And then one of our last slides before we kind of tee up the sort of questions that we're going to be talking through in the next sessions is kind of really, how could this look? And we wanted to just sort of open this door and make sure that folks might see this differently, that there's a potential for kind of full credit in certain areas and partial credit in other areas. And this is really illustrative. This is not a recommendation, but we could imagine a scenario whereby a certain quality or a certain type of on-site renewables might get a more substantial credit than maybe an offsite project that has renewable energy credits that are coming from far away or from a kind of an unbundled space. So we don't, again, not a recommendation, but just trying to sort of illustrate this concept that we don't have to uniformly apply a qualified renewable energy source across each of these sectors. So before we kind of spin just to kind of all questions, these are the types of things that we really want to kind of nail down and talk about as we enter our January meetings. And we've kind of reviewed them all. You know, what is a qualified renewable energy source? You know, how do we consider existing systems? How should we account for ownership of renewable energy credits? Should there be different REC treatments and partial credit given for different types of renewable energy credits? You know, how should we consider offsite renewable energy projects? Should they be full or partial? And what types of offsite renewable energy supply agreements might qualify? At what length and at what level of commitment? And then lastly, sort of this question around net metering and exported power and how that might impact a BEPS credit. So we've got one more slide. We've got some time here for kind of clarifying questions and next step. Our next step for our process is really these January feedback sessions. We're looking forward to getting and hearing from folks on their various kind of issue areas and where they feel their priorities lie as we look back to that previous slide. But thank you all for your time for today. I just wanted to put in one final plug that for folks that are in this meeting or folks that are watching this video, the folks that are here in this session today, we're going to be reaching out to you to schedule the sessions. If you're watching, if you'd like to participate in these meetings, please let us know. You can email us at energy@montgomerymd.gov. I'm going to grab a sip of water and maybe we can just go over a few questions here.
Sure. I think that some of the questions that have been asked are really good ones and ones that deserve more attention during a dedicated stakeholder session, especially ones that have opinions attached to them. But a good clarifying question in the chat is expanding on who the suppliers subject to the Maryland RPS requirements are. And Stan had responded that all utilities and electricity suppliers authorized to supply electricity in the state are subject to the RPS requirements. So just a clarifying note there. And then another question in the chat that came up that I think is worth bringing up on this call is explaining a little bit more about what replacement RECs are and how they work. So Adam, I'd love if you wanted to take a shot at answering that question.
Sure. Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. So replacement RECs, if you imagine a project that is, let's say you're putting solar panels on your home, and you want to be able to take the the credit, basically the environmental attributes, and consider the benefits from that environmental attributes. But you also need maybe the kind of high cost of the solar renewable energy credits that are being generated on your rooftop to help pay for the system. So you can imagine a scenario where you would say, okay, I'm going to sell to the developer, to the person that's putting the solar renewable energy credits on my roof. I'm going to sell those credits to the developer, and in turn, they're going to replace them, and they're going to replace them with renewable energy credits that have clean energy attributes, but they might not be from Maryland, and they might not be kind of as local, but they still have the kind of environmental attributes associated with them. And as I said, because renewable energy credits have different types and different areas that they're coming from, they have different values because they're applicable to different renewable portfolio standards and different legislations. So a renewable energy credit that is generated from a Texas wind project is going to have a very different value than a renewable energy credit generated from a Maryland solar project. And so when we think about the difference between those, and basically you can imagine kind of swapping those two, and that's really what a replacement REC kind of process might look like for somebody.
Great. Thanks, Adam. Appreciate the presentation here. There's a couple more questions coming in the chat, one specifically about considerations about how this different options could assist implementation of community choice aggregation in Montgomery County. I think that's a really good question to bring up in the second round of the stakeholder sessions here. Just monitoring the chat. We'll give folks a couple more minutes to see if there's any other clarifying questions about the presentation, just so we can all level set about what we're trying to achieve, listening to stakeholders, informing your participation in these work sessions will really inform the proposal that we bring forward to the county executive and the county council on how to treat renewable energy in the BEPS program. So we appreciate your time here and your attention, and appreciate your engagement in early 2022 moving forward on how this is all going to look like. This is uncharted territory, folks, and we really appreciate your time at the table here. Of course, the de facto question about if the presentation will be available online, yes, it will. The slide deck will be available, so you'll be able to share it, as will a version of this session here today will be available to view online, just for folks who weren't able to make it, just because we're so close to the holiday season. And then, of course, we have another question here about which types of renewable energy would be considered. Again, a really good question for the stakeholder sessions. And yeah, I feel like that covers a lot of the questions in here. Thank you. And I'll turn it back over to Adam to close us out.
Yeah, again, just thanks everybody for your time today, whether you're joining live or kind of joining over kind of a time delay. If you're interested in joining, and if you know other folks that might have strong opinions and ideas on this, we are interested in kind of hearing from people. The best place, again, to let us know is emailing us energy@montgomerycountymd.gov. And thanks everybody for a productive session today. We're looking forward to hearing from you in the future, and I hope everybody has a happy holiday.